Here we go. We're ready to render down our beef tallow. And I'm going to take you guys through two different processes here. We're going to do mostly a wet render, and then I'm also going to do a dry render for you guys just to show you the comparison of the two, because you will see once you start researching how to render your tallow for skincare, there is a lot of debate out there whether to do dry render or wet render, if there's a difference, if there's a benefit to one or the other. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. I'm going to render these down at the same temperature. I have a temperature gauge on my crock pot that I'm going to do the dry render in. I'm going to do a smaller amount of the dry render. I personally like to do the wet render. At least that's my method I've been using thus far that I have liked, because I do feel like it gets more of the protein out of it. The dry rendering, in my opinion, you still have a little bit more of that like beefy sense to it. Even if I'm like super good about cleaning out all the pieces beforehand. So that's just my experience, but everybody has a different opinion. So do you, but for those that don't really or haven't done the difference, I'm going to do both of them just so you can see the difference of the two. So I have a big old bag here of, let's see, this is almost 18 pounds of suet. So, and if you're going to do this, you want to get beef suet, not beef trimmings. Beef suet is that good fat that's around the kidneys. It has a higher fatty acid content. So that is the preference for using it in skincare. Okay, so for our dry render, that means that we are literally just putting the beef suet in our crock pot, and we're going to put the lid on it, and I'm going to cook it at 100 and between like 160, 170 degrees, just until it's melted, and then I'm going to pull it off. And then I'm going to do a wet render, but we'll come back to that. Let's get our dry render in our crock pot first. So we're literally just going to take some of this beef suet out of here and throw it in our crock pot. And as far as like the difference between the dry render and the wet render, I would say like the arguments on both sides are that dry render people say that they feel like some of the, like, I guess some of the compounds in the beef suet are lost when you're adding water or salt to it. But on the other side, the people on the side of wet renders don't believe that that is a thing, and believe that, in fact, doing the dry or the wet renders with the water and salt actually get more of the impurities out, and it's fine as long as you're doing enough dry renders after your first initial wet render. So I know that's kind of confusing, so I can do another video on that later, but for now, this is our dry render, nothing added to it, just our beef suet, and we're going to throw this on the crock pot. So for the rest of this, I have my roaster here. This is typically what I use because I do larger batches. So I'm going to put the rest of this. Now this has already been ground up by my my source that I get my beef suet from. So that's really nice. If you grind it up, you get a lot bigger yield at the end. So grinding it up is definitely a better way to do it, in my opinion. These are all just my opinions. So from the research that I've done. Also, when you coming back to the dry versus wet render, I've really searched quite a bit to try to find any like studies that support the idea that doing a dry render is like better for the tallow as an after product. And I haven't been able to find anything to support that yet. So I'm not saying that they're not out there. I just, in my research, haven't been able to find it. So, all right. So we got that in there. And I'm going to get some water, and I'm going to add a little bit of water and a little bit of salt in this. Okay, so I'm going to use about this much salt. I don't measure. It's just about that much. And about this much water. That's enough. And that's all we're going to use, but that's just going to help draw down some of the impurities. And again, on your first render, really want to keep it at a low heat. That will keep a lot of the beefy smell out of your tallow after product. So this one as well, I'm going to have it at about 170 degrees or so. So I will bring you guys back to check back in after we are done, or these are all melted down. You guys back and see how those look.